Hello, friends, and welcome back to Weird Wednesdays. Tattooed Biker here with you. And tonight I've got some creepy, true stories detailing unexplained encounters while hiking or camping in the forest. So grab your gear, kick back, and let's ride into the deep woods. Number 1. Dear TB, when I was around 15, me and my friends were driving around, going to all the haunted places around the basin. It was getting close to Halloween, so as tradition, we were all trying to scare each other. First, we went to a place called the Haunted Woods. This is an actual business, not a place in the woods. Then we went to an abandoned hotel near the Ute Reservation. Nothing of significance happened there. We didn't see or hear anything, and we were just goofing around, having fun. Then the driver says, "We're going to Skinwalker Ranch." I had never heard of Skinwalker Ranch, but I have heard plenty of stories about skinwalkers. I was intrigued at first, but as we dropped down the hill back behind the property, a feeling of total dread settled on me like a heavy blanket. Everyone in the car got more and more quiet, like they were feeling the heaviness too. "I don't think we should go in there," I spoke softly. "Oh, we're going." The driver announced, "There's no moon tonight, and no flashlights allowed," he continued. "I'll just stay in the truck then." "I have a really bad feeling I don't want to go," I said again. "You aren't staying in my truck alone, now get out," he said to me rather rudely. I got out of the truck and looked over at my best friend. Her face was white and her eyes were wide and round, and I knew that she felt the same way that I did. We shouldn't be here. The driver of the truck said that this was the back end of the huge ranch. I wouldn't have believed him that this was really Skinwalker Ranch if I didn't feel that it was in every nerve ending in my body. He walked over to an ancient post and pole fence, undid the loop of wire, holding up a small gate, and laid it on the ground. There was an overgrown 2-track road leading up into the darkness, and we followed it as he led us up to it. The horrible feeling of dread was almost overwhelming, and I felt like I was going to be sick. I wanted to go running back to the truck, but had a deep fear that something would pounce the moment I left the safety of the group. We weren't laughing and joking anymore here. That heaviness was weighing on all of us, and we walked silently through the dark. As we walked, I tried to keep my eyes on my feet, but I would occasionally glance to either side of the 2-track road. Each time I did, I would see a huge black mass out in the tall grass. I told myself it was just a cow or something, but each time I looked, it was in the same spot, off to the left, following our journey to the old homestead. Finally, the driver and leader of our foolish expedition stopped and said that we were almost to the old homestead, that we needed to stay quiet in case the owners were around. As he turned to start walking again, a growl came from the darkness, and he stopped and took a step back. He wasn't our fearless leader anymore. His voice was shaking as he told us it was time to head back to the truck. We walked a little ways back, and then one of our group said they needed to use the bathroom. We stopped by a small stream running along the south end of the property. I was smoking and talking to one of my friends about how relieved I was that we were leaving. I glanced down at the stream at the same time my friend did, just in time to see a black figure emerging from the water. It wasn't a cow. It wasn't a coyote. It looked like a too skinny and too tall man. We both screamed and ran back to the road. That was the last straw for everyone, and we all ran the entire way back to the truck. Now I know that is eerie, but kind of uneventful. A few months later, this adventure had slowly left my mind. I had started to convince myself that the figures in the darkness were just cows, and that it was probably just the dark and the running water playing tricks on my eyes and making me see things emerging from the water that weren't really there. My best friend had come over to my house to sit outside, bullshit, and smoke cigarettes. We did this pretty frequently. We lived in the middle of nowhere, so dumb things like this were about as much fun as we could have. So we're sitting in her car just across the road from my house. Her car is pointed towards the town park, which is just about a block away from my home. There are no other houses on the way to the park, so with the street lamps on at the park, you can basically see everything up there. "Oh, look, a deer," my friend says suddenly. I could see a set of glowing eyes on the very far end of the park. "Oh, yeah, there it is," I reply. We watch it as it slowly walks towards the center of the park. In this spot is a huge metal slide jungle gym thing that's probably 10 to 12 feet tall. As the deer is walking, I notice that for some reason, I can't make out any features of the deer. It seems to always be just out of reach of the street lamps that are dotted throughout the park. The deer is right next to the slide when, suddenly, it stands up. The eyes that we were watching were suddenly even with the platform of the slide, which would make this deer 10 to 12 feet tall. Then it starts to walk, standing on its hind legs. Me and my friend both start panicking. What is that? It's not a deer. We keep watching this extremely tall creature cross the park when my friend decided we're driving up there. She locks the doors and we head towards the park. When we were almost there, the eyes had crossed the street and went into the neighborhood across from the park. By the time we got up there, whatever it was had vanished. Another few months go by and the event had definitely rattled us, and there was no convincing ourselves that it was a deer. Deer do not walk on their hind legs, and they are not ever 10 feet tall. One night, I'm at the same friend's house. This friend lived smack dab in the middle of huge farmland. All around her were pastures. It was very peaceful most of the time. We had spent the night watching movies and hanging out. I went and started my car, and we were smoking together on her porch before I left. We were just chatting when suddenly her eyes leave my face and looked behind me, and her eyes grew wide. I turned to look to see two glowing red eyes just past the fence into her neighbor's pasture. "What is that?" I managed to say. "I don't know," she whispered back. The eyes remained fixed on us for about 30 seconds and then turned to the left, blinked, and vanished. We both ran back in the house. I didn't dare go home for another 45 minutes. If my car hadn't already been started, I probably wouldn't have left at all. A couple of years later, I was speaking with a Ute tribal member that I worked with, and she said something that gives me goosebumps to this day. She told me, "It isn't what's on the ranch that you should be afraid of. It's what follows you home when you leave." I'm convinced that something followed us from Skinwalker Ranch, and those terrifying events was something warning us to never go back. I never did, and I never will. Thanks for reading. Signed, Danny. Number 2. Dear Biker, I've wanted to send you my story for a while. It happened on September 2nd of last year, and each day that goes by, I feel more unsure about what I really heard that night. To preface, this took place in the Olympic Peninsula, along the Hood Canal. My girlfriend's parents recently bought a beautiful riverfront property in a rural town, down a private gravel road that has a few other houses here and there. The property is heavily forested on all sides, though the neighbors' houses are vaguely visible to both the left and the right. The night was winding down after watching a movie. Everyone had gone to sleep while I lay awake, playing on my phone. The windows were open, letting in the pleasant sound of the river bubbling outside. Close to midnight, I started hearing splashing down the river, which startled my dog, but was easily explainable as elk or deer crossing the river, since the area is pretty wild. However, after the splashing subsided, I started hearing a repeated animal cry that sounded like sort of a bellow, mixed with a scream or a yell. It's hard to remember exactly at this point in time, but it was deep, not like a cougar or a fox screaming, and fast in cadence. Definitely odd, but still explainable as an animal. This happened for 10 minutes or so, intermittently with what sounded like a huffing or a snorting sound. I was very alert at this point, listening, and trying to calm down my dog, who was unsettled by the sound as well. As I listened, it started moving closer. At first sounding like it was across the river, but now on the right side of the house. As it moved closer, it transformed into what sounded like a human screaming help in the most deranged and unsettling way possible. Like it was screaming help, but couldn't quite form or enunciate the words correctly. It literally gives me goosebumps just thinking about it right now. At that point, I was thinking, what the hell? And woke up my girlfriend, and we listened together in silence, then rushed to wake up her parents when we both heard a pronounced help in the scream. Both dogs started going ballistic, and the screaming stopped at some point in the commotion, so her parents didn't get a good grasp on the sound. After shining flashlights out the windows, we went downstairs and made sure all the doors and windows were locked. After a sleepless night, we woke up and walked the perimeter of the property and found no signs of animals or humans. I was half expecting to see some bloody human remains or something, with how intense those screams were. I imagine that's what a person being axe murdered might sound like. At that point, I really regret not going outside to investigate, as ever since I've been constantly racking my brain trying to figure out exactly what that was. I've looked into every animal sound out there and haven't found a single thing that even sounds similar to what we heard that night. I'd probably think I imagined the whole thing if my girlfriend hadn't heard it as well. I'd love to hear any thoughts or similar experiences from your community. Thanks. Signed, Marcus. Number 3. Hey, Tattooed. So I've been lurking here for a while, and I figured now was the time to tell my own story. My family has a hunting cabin in the Allegheny National Forest of Pennsylvania. My grandfather, who worked in a steel mill in Pittsburgh, bought the land in the 70s, whenever the real estate agents used to go into the mills and post ads for huge plots of land that the steel workers would break up and all get their own plots for dirt cheap, and then help each other build their camps. Allegedly, there was a grave site found on the property that my grandpa bought. The details aren't exactly clear how it was discovered, but apparently some type of survey was done before the property was sold, and archaeologists from the University of Pittsburgh uncovered a very old Native American grave. They excavated the grave, but the pit, by that point now just a depression in the ground, was still there. This was on my grandfather's property, about 200 yards away from the cabin. Of course, I don't know that any of this is true, but the depression was, and as far as I know, still there. And that was a story we were all told. Of course, when I was a kid, my cousins and I used to do very dumb and disrespectful things, like go back to the site in the middle of the night and dare each other to lay down in it. I was probably about 10 years old when this happened, in the early 90s. My dad swears he doesn't remember it, but my cousin I keep in touch with clearly also remembers it. We were sitting around the campfire, roasting hot dogs and marshmallows, talking, that sort of thing. Obviously, there was no alcohol on my part, as I was like 10, and my dad never drank. I remember my dad shushing everybody, and my older cousins, and my dad was talking about seeing someone in the woods. My dad is telling everyone to be quiet, and he shines a flashlight into the woods. We don't see anybody. We go back to our business, and one of my cousins shouts out that there he is again. By shielding the light from the fire, you could see a wispy, grayish human figure walking through the woods slowly, like prowling, like he's trying not to make any noise. He was walking from our left, as if he came from behind the cabin, and was crossing the wood line along our left, and then along the front of the yard, just in front of the trees, but probably maybe 50 yards or so from us, taking a wide turn to avoid us. Nobody said a word. My dad and one of my cousins both shined flashlights several times, but he would simply disappear. You could only see him in the dark and after your eyes had adjusted. At some point, we walked into the field of view where the fire was between us and him, and we never saw him again. The creepy part is the direction he was walking was towards the gravesite. We had never seen this before and never saw it again. I probably spent a week every summer at the camp until I was about 20. Family drama and weirdness after my grandfather died kind of ruined the camp for us, and I haven't been back. Needless to say, we didn't mess with the gravesite again after that. Thanks for letting me tell my story. Signed, Trevor. And there it is. All the creepy, true Deep Woods encounter submissions I have for this evening. If you've ever had an unusual encounter, or maybe a brush with the unexplained, do me a favor and send it to the email in the description, and your story just might make it into a future video. Anyways, thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.